Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. Well, on January 27th, Wichita Mayor Carl Brewer delivered his annual State of the City address. It is his last such address, as he is not eligible to run again because of our term limit laws. And there are some things we need to talk about regarding the mayor's speech. Now, it's tempting to overlook these things, as Brewer will leave office in April. But he said he wants to remain involved in public affairs. Plus, many of the things we'll talk about are not specific to Brewer, but also apply to other council members, the city's bureaucratic staff, and civic leaders. Well, listening to the speech, it was as though the events of the last decade were distant history. Here's an example. Talking about the Great Recession that started in 2008 and cost our city many jobs, the mayor said, "But we met these challenges head on. As our history has shown, we are resilient. We face our challenges, we stick together, and we overcome." That's the end of the mayor's quote. But I say, no, we did not meet these challenges head on. We did not overcome. We have not overcome. And you may remember that last year, the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce developed a chart, the so-called spaghetti chart. That chart showed how much Wichita lagged behind other cities in jobs. And viewers of Wichita Liberty TV and readers of wichitaliberty.org, they shouldn't have been surprised to learn these facts, as I had been showing similar charts for some time before the Chamber prepared its chart. And the charts are sobering. Wichita has lost many jobs, but the jobs have not come back. We did not overcome our job losses. You may remember that the Chamber developed the jobs chart to bolster the case for sales tax revenue to be used for economic development incentives. And in fact, the Chamber leadership told the City Council that the Chamber would not support the sales tax unless the Jobs Fund was included. And city promotional material used to promote the sales tax read, "During the past decade, jobs grew by only 1% compared to much stronger growth during the previous 3 decades." End quote. In light of this, how can the mayor say we faced our challenges and overcame them? Furthermore, the mayor's speech was delivered just 2 weeks after Bombardier Learjet announced the loss of 620 jobs in Wichita due to pausing the work on a new aircraft model. And many industry observers said the project is likely to be canceled altogether. This project received economic development incentives. I wonder, does the mayor count this as an example of overcoming our challenges? And here's something I find totally astonishing. On the day of the Bombardier announcement, the Wichita Business Journal reported, "Wichita Mayor Carl Brewer says Bombardier officials told him last night that an announcement was coming today." Well, it seems as though the Bombardier announcement took city officials, including the mayor, by surprise. As I said, this Bombardier project received economic development incentives from the city, county, and state. And many officials participated in the ribbon-cutting ceremony for this project. They were all happy to have their photos in the newspaper or on television. They tell us that their wisdom, their foresight, their active management of the economy, that was what produced these jobs. But when it comes time for bad news, the mayor says he didn't know until the day before. Well, but he did say we're overcoming our challenges. And this is not the first time the city has been surprised at job loss. When Boeing announced it would leave Wichita, the Wichita Eagle reported Boeing has not requested any public tax incentives from the city of Wichita since 2007. And the newspaper quoted the mayor, Mayor Carl Brewer, as saying, maybe that was a sign. The city, the Wichita Chamber of Commerce, our entire economic development regime is quick to take credit for any gains in jobs. But what about taking responsibility? Last year, I was relieved to see the Chamber show the spaghetti chart of jobs. But as time went on, I realized the city and Chamber were not going to accept responsibility for anything. And by the way, a usual component of the State of the City speeches is where the mayor announces how many jobs were created by our economic development efforts over the year. But that was missing from this year's speech. Not taking, the avoidance of responsibility, that was the theme of the mayor's State of the City address. Here's something else the mayor said. He said, "We need to be in the game of growing jobs." And I said, what? He finally realizes this? Who has been mayor the past 8 years? Carl Brewer was talking as though someone else has been mayor for the past 8 years. And on the same theme, the mayor told the audience, our water and sewer pipes are crumbling. We also need to repair or replace most of our drainage systems. The total cost is estimated to be at least $2.1 billion. Nearly half of our streets are ranked below nationally accepted benchmarks. Those from the mayor's printed remarks. Now, in the past, when the mayor's talked about this backlog of water and sewer maintenance, he used the $2.1 billion figure with the additional explanation that this is over a 30-year time frame. Now, pointing out that our city's infrastructure is crumbling, that's something that you'd expect to see in the campaign speech of someone challenging an incumbent mayor. I mean, who has let this infrastructure crumble? Who has presided over a growing maintenance backlog? This all did not take place overnight. And the mayor and the council take pride in saying our property tax mill levy rate has not increased for a long time. But actually, as we've seen on Wichita Liberty TV, it has crept up over the years. But aside from that, what is the point of low taxes if we are not taking care of our assets? These are things that Wichita taxpayers have paid for and entrusted to the stewardship of Carl Brewer and the other council members. Now we are told the city has not been maintaining them. And the numbers are huge. $2.1 billion over 30 years is spending at the rate of $70 million per year. And for context, the proposed 1 cent per dollar sales tax was estimated to raise $80 million per year, if it had passed, that is. So it would take nearly all of a 1 cent sales tax to fix what the mayor says is wrong. Now, the mayor and council have raised water and sewer rates a little each year over the past few years, in part to fund this necessary maintenance. The most recent increases are thought to bring in an additional $5 million per year for the water utility and $2.6 million per year for the sewer utility. So that's about $7.5 million per year total. But the mayor said we need to spend $70 million per year. And by the way, the proposed sales tax, I hope you remember, was for development of a new water supply and other things, not for maintaining our existing infrastructure, except a small portion was for fixing some streets. Well, there was some good news. The mayor told the audience what it already knew, which is, he said, recently we got some really great news about the arena. It will host the March Madness basketball tournament in 2018, he said. So, yeah, that's not bad news, it's good news. But it's a few days of basketball games to take place 3 years from now. This is not an economic development strategy, especially when we realize the costs we're likely to pay to host this tournament. But we may never know those costs, as the Convention and Visitors Bureau does not have to disclose its spending records, and the mayor supports this lack of fundamental government transparency. The mayor also told the audience, Our economic development strategy will be further strengthened by Wichita State University's Innovation Campus. Now, this is something, the Innovation Campus, that the city is really counting on for jobs. Several candidates for mayor mention this extensively as they campaign. And I think the Innovation Campus is probably a good idea. But if you search for other universities with similar programs, you will find many located all across the country. So I don't think we can say that what WSU is doing is trailblazing progress that will set us apart from all other cities. It seems more like we're just keeping up with the other places. And that may be all that we need to do. We need to be realistic one way or the other. And I did notice that this year the mayor did not mention government transparency as he has in the past. And as I've shown you, the mayor does not support the citizens' right to know how taxpayer money is spent, so I think it's good he did not make any additional false promises in this regard. Now, the mayor's address is full of the usual things you hear in speeches like this. Thank you for giving me your trust and support. We are all better when we work together, things like that. But I think that trust of the mayor, and by extension, trust of Wichita city government, is low. You remember 3 years ago from this month, there was a special election for a downtown hotel tax incentives. Citizens overturned a decision that was made by the mayor and council. And you may remember the headline in the Wall Street Journal. A Wichita shocker. You can beat City Hall, it read, the headline. And the editorial read, local politicians like to get in bed with local business, and taxpayers are usually the losers. So 3 cheers for a voter revolt in Wichita, Kansas last week that shows such sweetheart deals can be defeated. And just last November, after the city bragged about all the extensive citizen outreach, 102 meetings, all the listening the city did, voters defeated the city's tax proposal by a landslide. I think the actions of Carl Brewer and other council members, the cronyism, the lack of respect for those who do not agree with city orthodoxy, I think these things are why the sales tax vote failed and why people seem to have so little faith in our government. Okay, I know I've been critical of the mayor, but most other council members, bureaucrats, and civic leaders share pretty much the same beliefs and attitudes. Oh, so I'm sure there have been some good things that have happened. But did you know that the city's public affairs staff has a budget of $620,000 per year, and that the city has its own television station? So the city of Wichita has plenty of resources for getting out the message it wants. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Last week I mentioned a new book by David Boaz, who is Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute and a past guest on Wichita Liberty TV. The book he wrote is titled The Libertarian Mind, a Manifesto for Freedom. I started to work my way through it, but I have to confess I'm really a pretty slow reader. So here's a video that the Cato Institute produced in conjunction with the release of the book. The video features Tom Palmer, who we've seen in other videos I've shown you on Wichita Liberty TV. So please enjoy this video, a short introduction to libertarianism, The Libertarian Mind with David Boaz.
Libertarianism is the view that all people have the right to live their own lives as they choose, so long as they respect the equal rights of others.
As long as I've known what the word libertarian meant, I've considered myself a libertarian.
People like Adam Smith, John Locke, all the way back to the Enlightenment, they tend to believe in a very simple set of things.
I've been involved in promotion of the ideas of liberty or libertarianism for a long, long time, since I was in high school.
I wrote a libertarian column for my high school newspaper, for example, and most of that was based in what I would just call general skepticism.
What really captivated me was, one, opposition to dictatorship, and there were more dictatorships around the world then, there still are some. And then second, when I was introduced to economics, the best system I thought for organizing people was to let them organize their own lives within a common framework of the rule of law, rather than having a master plan for society.
Basically the idea that people should be pretty much free to do what they want as long as it doesn't impinge too much upon other people.
It seems like skepticism and libertarianism go very hand in hand together. Being skeptical of claims to power, being skeptical of claims of truth made by powerful people, being skeptical that there's only one way of doing things, being skeptical that someone can tell you we're all going to have to do it this way and this is the only way it can work, and then realizing that that person has a vested interest.
Libertarianism is the notion that individuals are best suited to run their own lives without interference or coercion from outside forces.
Libertarians defend the rights to life, liberty, and property of each person, rights that we have naturally before governments are instituted. Libertarian thought emphasizes the dignity of each individual, which entails both rights and responsibilities.
When people say the government decided this or the people decided that the government or the people are not persons. They're not like you and me. They're made up of lots of people. When people casually say, we decided, the people decided, the government decided to do this or that, libertarians ask, what does that mean? It means some people were deciding for other people. It turns out government isn't some powerful big person making decisions.
There's nothing special about people in government. There's nothing particularly worse about them. There's nothing particularly better about them. When you go from the private side to the public sector, you don't grow wings, you don't ditch devil horns and suddenly get a halo, you don't become more intelligent, you don't suddenly become an expert on economics. None of those things happen. You just move from an area where you're in private life to an area where you suddenly have control over people.
The progressive extension of dignity to more people, to women, to people of different races, religions, and sexual orientations, is one of the great triumphs for liberty in the Western world and increasingly the entire world. Because individuals are moral agents, they have a right to be secure in their life, liberty, and property. These rights are not granted by any government or society. They're inherent in our nature as human beings.
One of the central pillars of the whole libertarian approach to the world is the idea that individual human beings have the right to manage their own affairs. They have rights to govern their own lives.
Respecting individual rights means respecting people's autonomy, it means respecting their dignity, and particularly it means treating them in the same way that you would like to be treated.
A great libertarian abolitionist, someone who worked to abolish slavery in Brazil, Joaquim Nabuco, put it very neatly. He said we should love the freedom of other people, and only if we love the freedom of other people will we truly appreciate and treasure our own.
It is intuitively right, we might even say it's self-evident, that individuals should enjoy the security of these rights. The burden of proof should lie with people who would take those rights away. A great degree of order in society is necessary for individuals to survive and flourish, and it's pretty understandable that we think order has to be imposed, the way we would impose order on a stamp collection or on a business that we might create or a project. What we have trouble understanding is that the greatest degree of order in society actually arises spontaneously.
It turns out that you don't need a commanding power or a dictator to create order. Most of us are hardwired to think that when there's order, someone must have created the order.
Think of the most important institutions in society. Language wasn't designed and written down by anybody. It evolved spontaneously. Same thing with law. And perhaps most importantly for our purposes, the free market. The market is not planned. The market is not designed by anyone. The market is the product of thousands or millions, even billions of people making choices every day based on what will make them and their families better off.
That's the order of a free society. It's unpredictable, you can't predict the details of it, but it's nonetheless orderly and harmonious. And that's what libertarianism is about.
The rule of law means that individuals are governed by generally applicable and spontaneously developed legal rules, not by arbitrary commands from some authority.
A good legal system should solve more problems than it creates, for example. You can't have a just society with laws that are capriciously enforced, unpredictable, and impossible to plan your life around.
Those rules should protect the freedom of individuals to live their lives as they choose, so long as they respect everybody else's equal rights. To protect our rights, individuals form governments. But governments are dangerous institutions. Libertarians have a deep skepticism about concentrated power because they understand what Lord Acton said, that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we want to divide and limit power, and that means especially to limit government, generally through a written constitution that spells out the powers of government and limits it to those powers. Limited government is the basic political implication of libertarianism.
The Constitution grants powers only explicitly. It assumes no powers are going to be in government. It says there are 18 things the government is allowed to do. And insofar as those 18 things are followed, you'd get a pretty good constitutionally limited government.
To survive and to flourish, individuals need to engage in economic activity. The right to property entails the right to exchange property by mutual agreement. Free markets are the economic system of free individuals, and they're necessary to create wealth.
There's more opportunity in the United States simply because we have a freer political system and freer markets here. People are allowed to engage in more mutually beneficial and voluntary economic exchanges. As a result, people are able to take more risks, reap those rewards, bear the cost themselves, and over time this means that we accumulate capital, skills, and that culture which produces consistently an increasing economy and more job opportunities, not just for Americans, but for people from other places as well. And people who come here recognize that, recognize the opportunities, and they want to be part of that.
So one of the most effective ways that we can promote peaceful coexistence with other nations is actually to trade with them. Free trade is a great leveling force. When countries trade with one another, research shows they are far less likely to fight one another.
Libertarians believe that people will be freer and more prosperous if government intervention in their economic choices is minimized. Much of the impetus for libertarianism in the 17th century was a reaction against monarchs and aristocrats who lived off the productive labor of other people. Libertarians defended the right of all people to the fruits of their labor. This effort developed into a respect for the dignity of work and production, and especially for the growing middle class who were looked down upon by aristocrats. Libertarians developed a pre-Marxist class analysis that divided society into two basic classes: those who worked by their own labor and those who took wealth by force from others. Thomas Paine, for instance, wrote, "There are two distinct classes of men in the nation, those who pay taxes and those who receive and live upon the taxes." Similarly, Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1824, "We have more machinery of government than is necessary, too many parasites living on the labor of the industrious." Modern libertarians defend the right of people to keep what they produce against a new class of politicians and bureaucrats who would seize it to transfer to their clients and cronies. Libertarians have always battled the age-old scourge of war. They understood that war brings death and destruction on a massive scale, destroys family and economic life, and puts more power in the hands of the ruling class, which just might explain why the rulers haven't always shared the people's sentiment for peace.
Henry Kissinger once said that no foreign policy, no matter how ingenious, can be successful if it is thought of in the minds of a few and carried in the hearts of none. And what he really meant by that is the idea that foreign policy has to be a decision made by the people, not just by a few elites. So foreign policy will never be successful unless it's supported by the population at large.
People around the world have come to see each other as other individual human beings to think abstractly that that person may look different, speak differently, worship differently, have a different language, that nonetheless they're people like me. And if we have a common nature, as the great Roman statesman Marcus Tullius Cicero put it, then certainly we are obliged by the law of nature not to act violently against each other.
Personally, and I think many people would agree with me, just don't think that we will ever reach a state where war is impossible. But the good news is that political science research tells us that war should be rare, very uncommon.
Free men and women, of course, have often had to defend their societies against foreign threats. But throughout history, war has usually been the common enemy of peaceful, productive people on both sides of the conflict.
For societies to remain free, there has to be at least a critical mass of the population of some understanding of what it means to be a free person. But some people in every social order take it as a personal mission, a calling. I think of William Wilberforce, who spent over 50 years of his life in Britain, in the Parliament, and agitating in public, in the media, all over, for a simple goal, the elimination of slavery in Britain. We might still have that monstrous institution if there were not people like Frederick Douglass and William Wilberforce, Lysander Spooner, working to eliminate it. Those struggles for freedom are with us today.
I've dedicated a large portion of my life to advancing liberty because it is a rare and precious institution that has existed in few places for short periods of human history.
And if I can just push the cord in a way toward preserving those individual liberties, in a very real sense, if I can just do that once, I will have purchased my life. I will have made my life more worth living because I have fought for someone else's liberty. And of course, in fighting for their liberty, I'm fighting for my liberty.
To be a libertarian means that in some sense it hurts you to see that happen when people suffer violence, they're murdered because of their political opinions, because of their religion, because of their sexuality, because they engaged in some behavior that wasn't harmful to anyone else, and yet violence is visited upon them. For me personally, I hate it when I see that, and every time I see someone suffering some form of oppression, I want to do something about it. That's what moves my life, and I think it's what moves the lives of those who have dedicated themselves to loving the freedom of other people.